Welcome to our channel where incredible stories come to life. The galaxy was vast and the stars blinked quietly, unaware of the chaos that would soon unfold on one of their distant worlds. Pyros, a molten wasteland of firestorms and volcanic landscapes, was a planet unlike any other. Its atmosphere crackled with the intensity of the heat, and its surface was constantly reshaped by eruptions, earthquakes, and violent storms. Home to the Pyrosians, a species that had learned to bend fire to their will, the planet was a marvel of dangerous beauty. But for all its grandeur, it was a land of oppression, where the strong ruled and the weak suffered. Above the swirling clouds and the jagged peaks of Pyros, a spacecraft cut through the atmosphere, heading toward the capital city. Inside, Laura Flame Lee adjusted her helmet and sat in the cockpit, her mind focused. The last few days had been a blur of briefings, classified reports, and intense training simulations, all leading up to this moment. As a combat pilot for the Intergalactic Union, Laura had faced many dangerous missions, but none as daunting as the one ahead. Pyros, she muttered to herself. The name of the planet alone filled her with both excitement and dread. She had heard rumors about the planet's fire-based technology, but what the Union had discovered was far worse than expected. The Pyrosian elite had been using their advanced fire manipulation technologies to control not only their own people, but other worlds as well. And now they were on the verge of creating a superweapon that could obliterate entire planets. Her mission was simple: infiltrate Pyros, locate the revolutionary forces, and help them destroy the superweapon before it could be activated. But nothing was ever simple in the galaxy. The lights in the cockpit flickered as the ship entered the upper atmosphere of Pyros. Laura's hand tightened on the controls as the ship was buffeted by the violent winds. She adjusted the flight path and powered through the turbulence, feeling the strain on her suit as the temperature outside soared. The thermal readouts showed the planet's surface sweltering at temperatures beyond any human's capacity to survive without specialized equipment. Laura was no ordinary human, though. She was equipped with a state-of-the-art survival suit, reinforced with adaptive technology designed to protect her from extreme environments. Her helmet displayed real-time data as she descended, the surface of Pyros growing ever closer. The ship's engines roared as they descended into the heart of the volcanic landscape, lava flows and geysers shooting up from the cracks in the ground. Pyros was a world of constant destruction, where the Earth itself seemed to fight against the inhabitants, reshaping itself in violent bursts of fire and rock. The ship landed with a loud thud, kicking up ash and dust as Laura quickly disengaged her harness. The door of the craft opened with a hiss, and she stepped out onto the barren, scorched earth, her boots sinking into the blackened sand. The heat was suffocating, pressing against her suit like an invisible weight. But Laura had trained for this. She had prepared for it. "Welcome to Pyros," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the roar of the wind and the distant rumblings of the planet's ever-volatile core. As she trekked through the desolate wasteland, her neural link buzzed with incoming data. She scanned the horizon, searching for any signs of life. The landscape was eerily empty, save for the occasional flash of lava in the distance. Pyros was not a place for the faint of heart, but she knew there were people here. Rebels fighting for their freedom against the oppressive Pyrosian elite. Laura's mission was to find the leader of the revolution, Jarek, and offer the Union support. But she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than she had been told. Pyrosians were a proud and resilient people, their culture built around fire and the unrelenting power of their world. And yet, a small group had risen up to challenge the system that had once revered their strength. The Union's intelligence suggested that the rebels were outmatched, outgunned, and barely surviving in the hostile environment. A series of crackling bursts interrupted her thoughts, and she adjusted her suit's audio filters to enhance the sounds of the communication channel. "Flame," the voice of General Anders came through clearly. "We're tracking your position. Keep moving west. The rebel camp should be just beyond that ridge. They're expecting you." Laura nodded and began her journey toward the ridge, her suit's temperature regulation system humming as it compensated for the intense heat. The closer she got to the rebel camp, the more she could feel the tension in the air. Pyrosians had a unique relationship with fire. It wasn't just a weapon or an energy source. It was a part of their very identity. And the revolutionaries she was about to meet were no exception. They fought not just for survival, but for the freedom to live as their people had always lived, without fear of tyranny. As she crested the ridge, she saw them, figures cloaked in ragged clothing, standing near a fire that was somehow contained within a makeshift barrier. Their faces were hard, determined, and their eyes burned with the fierce resolve that only those who had been pushed to the brink of extinction could possess. At the front of the group stood a tall figure, his face shadowed by the flickering flames. Jarek, the leader of the revolutionaries. His eyes met hers as she approached, and for a moment, they simply stared at each other, sizing one another up. He was a man of few words, but his presence spoke volumes. "You're the pilot from the Union?" Jarek's voice was deep, heavy with suspicion. "I've heard of you. Flame, the one who survived on planets even the Pyrosians couldn't conquer." Laura nodded, her hands resting on the hilt of her energy blade. "I'm here to help. The Union wants to stop the weapon the Pyrosian elite is developing." Jarek's expression darkened. "And you think we're just going to sit back and let you do it? We've been fighting them for years and we've barely survived. What can you offer that we haven't already tried?" "I can help you take down the weapon," Laura said, her voice firm. "But I need your trust, and we don't have time for a fight between us. The elite is more dangerous than you realize. We don't just need to win this battle. We need to stop their plans once and for all." There was a long pause, the fire crackling between them. Then Jarek nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We'll work with you. But know this, if you fail us, we'll have no choice but to fight back. This planet is our home and we'll burn it to the ground before we let them take it from us." Laura understood the weight of his words. She had no illusions about the stakes of this mission. Pyros was a world on the edge of destruction, and it was up to her to stop the chaos before it spread beyond the planet. As the rebel camp settled into a tense quiet, Laura stood with Jarek and the other leaders, gathering around a rudimentary map of the Pyrosian capital. The air was thick with the scent of sulfur and burnt earth. The planet's violent nature was evident in every corner of their environment. The flames that licked at the sky were reminders of what they were all fighting against. "Here's what we know," Jarek said, pointing to a location on the map. "The Pyrosian elite are hiding in the central command bunker beneath the capital. They've been constructing their super weapon deep underground, in an area where only their highest officers can access." Laura nodded, scanning the map. The location of the weapon was marked by a red circle, its proximity to the capital making it almost impossible to breach without attracting immediate attention. "So, how do we get in without being detected?" Laura asked, her voice steady but tinged with the gravity of their task. Jarek's eyes hardened. "We hit them where they least expect it. The Pyrosians are proud of their technology, but they underestimate the one thing they can't control: fire." He looked up at the massive volcanoes in the distance, their peaks glowing ominously. "If we can lure their attention elsewhere, we can slip through their defenses and get to the weapon." Laura considered this for a moment, her mind calculating the risks. She was no stranger to dangerous missions, but this one felt different. The stakes were higher. If they failed, Pyros could be lost forever. "You'll need my ship to get close enough," Laura said. "My sensors are more advanced than anything you have here. I can get us within striking distance and give you a clear route to the bunker." Jarek's lips curled into a tight smile. "I knew the Union would have something useful. Let's just hope your ship can handle this planet's atmosphere." Laura stood tall, her hands tightening around her weapons. "We'll make it work. Now let's get to work." The next day, under the cover of darkness, Laura and Jarek led a small team of rebels toward the outer rim of the capital. The plan was simple: create a diversion in the city center to draw the attention of the Pyrosian elite, then slip through the cracks and infiltrate the command bunker. The night sky above them was black, the stars faint against the towering ash clouds. Laura's shuttle, a sleek armored craft designed for stealth, hovered silently above them. The temperature was unbearable, but Laura's suit kept her cool, the heat waves from the planet's core still reaching temperatures that made even her advanced technology work overtime. She couldn't help but marvel at the resilience of the Pyrosian people. Their technology was based on fire, but they had been living in this brutal environment for centuries. As they moved closer to the capital, the distant sounds of explosions and the crackle of fire reached their ears. Jarek's team had started their diversion. The rebels attacked one of the Pyrosian elite's fuel depots, sending a massive fireball into the sky. "Now's our chance," Jarek said, his voice low. "Let's move." The team sprinted toward the edge of the capital, moving through the narrow, labyrinthine streets. The heat was unbearable and the air was thick with smoke. Laura led the way, using her superior technology to navigate through the smoke-filled streets with ease. They reached the outer walls of the command bunker without incident, thanks to the distraction the rebels had created. Laura's ship hovered above them, its thrusters muted as it maintained its position, waiting for the signal to land. "Take your positions," Laura commanded. "I'll provide cover." Jarek and his team set explosives along the perimeter of the bunker, their movements quick and precise. Laura scanned the area for any signs of movement, her hand resting on her pulse gun. The tension was palpable, and every sound seemed to echo in the still night. The countdown began. Laura's heart pounded in her chest. The first explosion went off with a deafening roar, followed by several more in quick succession. The bunker's outer walls crumbled, exposing the way inside. "Go, go, go!" Jarek shouted, leading the charge. The rebels rushed inside, their weapons drawn and ready. Laura followed closely behind, her senses on high alert. She could feel the weight of their mission bearing down on her. This was it, the moment that could change everything. Inside the bunker, the air was cold, a stark contrast to the searing heat of the surface. The walls were lined with blackened steel, the glow of distant fires flickering from the surface above. The facility was quiet, almost eerily so. Laura's mind raced as they moved deeper into the complex. "We need to find the control room," Jarek said. "That's where the superweapons core is located." Laura led the way, her suit's enhanced sensors allowing her to navigate the dark corridors with ease. They passed through several large chambers, some filled with crates of Pyrosian equipment, others empty and abandoned. The deeper they went, the more they realized that the Pyrosian elite were preparing for something catastrophic. The walls were adorned with schematics of the weapon, plans for its activation, and designs for its final construction. Finally, they reached the central chamber. At the center stood the superweapon, a massive structure that seemed to pulse with energy, its core a swirling vortex of flames and light. Laura felt a chill run down her spine. This was it, the weapon capable of wiping out entire planets. "We need to destroy it," Laura said, her voice tight. "Now." Jarek nodded, his eyes focused on the weapon. "But how? The control room is heavily fortified." Laura quickly accessed her suit's systems, scanning the control panels. "I can bypass their security. It will take time, but I can do it." As she worked, the door to the chamber suddenly slammed shut with a deafening clang. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Laura cursed under her breath. "They're here," she muttered. The Pyrosian elite had found them. Laura turned to Jarek. "We need to hold them off long enough for me to disable the weapon." The door burst open and a squad of Pyrosian soldiers stormed into the room, their weapons drawn. Laura didn't hesitate. She opened fire, her pulse gun sending precise blasts into the advancing soldiers. The rebels followed her lead, returning fire with their own weapons, but the Pyrosians were well trained and the battle quickly became a brutal firefight. Laura's suit absorbed the impact of incoming shots, the armor holding strong as she ducked behind a pillar for cover. She could hear the crackle of fire in the distance as the structure around them began to groan under the strain of the battle. "Almost there," Laura said through clenched teeth, her fingers flying over the controls. "I just need a few more seconds." Jarek, his eyes fierce, fired another round into the advancing Pyrosians. "You have 3 minutes. We'll cover you." Laura's heart raced as she focused on the task at hand. The security protocols were intricate, but her suit's systems were advanced enough to break through them. She could hear the hum of the weapon's core intensifying as the countdown to activation continued. They were running out of time. Finally, with a final keystroke, Laura deactivated the weapon's core. The room filled with a bright flash of light as the superweapon powered down, its pulse fading to nothing. Jarek let out a breath of relief. "You did it." But their victory was short-lived. The Pyrosian elite had already regrouped, and more soldiers were closing in. Laura and Jarek exchanged a glance. This was far from over. The silence that followed the deactivation of the superweapon was a brief reprieve, but the gravity of the situation was far from over. Laura felt the weight of the planet's suffocating atmosphere press against her, and she knew they had no time to waste. The Pyrosian elite would not take this defeat lightly. "They'll be back in force," Laura said, her voice grim as she scanned the room for any possible escape routes. The energy field around them flickered, but it was still standing strong, reinforcing the structure. Jarek, wiping the sweat from his brow, looked around at his team. We need to move fast. If the elite don't kill us, the planet will. His voice was strained but determined. This place won't hold much longer. Laura quickly analyzes the situation, noting the expanding cracks in the ceiling as the Pyrosian forces began to flood the chamber. I agree, she said. We'll need to find another way out. The main entrance is compromised. With her neural link active, she began scanning the schematics of the facility that were stored in her suit's database. A narrow access tunnel to the east, one used for emergency evacuations, appeared as the only viable exit. We're going through here, Laura declared, pointing toward the tunnel. It'll lead us out to the surface, but we'll have to move quickly. Jarek nodded, signaling to his team. They quickly moved to the tunnel entrance, which was reinforced with heavy metal doors. As Laura approached the door controls, she had to disable the locks manually, a process that would take precious seconds. The sounds of approaching Pyrosian soldiers grew louder, their heavy boots thundering down the corridors. Laura could feel the heat building again, the pressure in the air becoming unbearable. Sweat poured down her face as she fought against the countdown in her mind. Come on, she muttered under her breath, tapping commands into her suit's interface. The lock clicked open just as a volley of gunfire erupted behind them. Move, Jarek shouted. They surged into the tunnel, the door slamming shut behind them. The corridor was narrow, the air thick with the stench of burned metal. As they moved through the claustrophobic passage, Laura's heart raced, each step echoing in the silence. The low hum of her suit's adaptive systems was the only sound breaking the tension. We're almost there, Laura said, her voice cutting through the tension. The faint glow of emergency lights illuminated their path as they descended deeper into the mountain. The tunnel bent sharply, leading toward the surface. As they pushed forward, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, her instincts screaming at her to move faster. Suddenly, the ground shook violently. Earthquake! Shouted one of the rebels, trying to keep his balance. A series of loud cracks reverberated through the tunnel and the walls trembled. A massive explosion from above caused the entire structure to rumble. The tunnel's ceiling buckled, rocks and debris falling around them in an avalanche of destruction. Move, Laura yelled, grabbing Jarek by the arm and pulling him forward as the tunnel began to collapse. She could feel the shock waves shaking the ground beneath her, the overwhelming force of the explosion sending shock waves through her body. With her enhanced strength, she shoved aside debris, keeping the team moving. But the tunnel was starting to cave in on them, and time was running out. The exit was still ahead, but the pressure was building. Come on, she shouted again, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The walls were narrowing, and the temperature was rising as the volcanic activity above intensified. They were trapped, and there was no time to waste. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened up into the open air. The sky above was dark, the volcanoes on the horizon burning brightly as the eruption continued to tear apart the landscape. They had made it to the surface, but the battle was far from over. The surface of Pyros was a hellscape. Rivers of lava surged around jagged rocks, and the air was thick with ash. The heat was unbearable, but the adrenaline coursing through Laura's veins kept her focused. The rebel team staggered out into the open, desperate for any sort of cover. Where's the ship? Jarek demanded, scanning the horizon for any sign of Laura's craft. Laura quickly activated her communication systems, reaching out to her ship's pilot. Hold tight, she said into her earpiece. We'll be there soon. The ground beneath them rumbled again, and a distant explosion shattered the silence. The Pyrosian elite were closing in. Their forces, no longer worried about secrecy, were launching a full-scale assault to finish what they had started. Laura could hear the distant whine of their engines, the faint hum of energy weapons charging in the distance. They're coming, shouted one of the rebels, pointing toward the horizon. The sound of their engines grew louder, and soon a line of armored Pyrosian soldiers appeared, moving toward them with terrifying precision. The ground shook with every step they took, their massive exoskeletons designed to withstand the planet's extreme conditions. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. This is it, Laura said, turning to Jarek. We fight or die. Jarek met her gaze with a grim nod. We fight. The first wave of Pyrosian soldiers advanced, their weapons raised. Laura stepped forward, her pulse gun primed and ready. The rebel forces were scrambling to find cover, and she could feel the sweat dripping down her face, but there was no turning back. Pyros was on the brink of destruction, and it was up to them to stop it. The battle that followed was nothing short of chaotic. Laura fired relentlessly, her enhanced suit giving her strength and agility that allowed her to keep up with the Pyrosians despite the intense gravitational pressure. Each blast she sent out found its mark, taking down one soldier after another. Her team fought valiantly, but the Pyrosian elite were relentless, their sheer strength overwhelming. As the ground beneath them cracked, threatening to swallow them whole, Laura's mind raced. The rebel forces were being pushed back, and their numbers were dwindling. But she couldn't give up now, not after everything they had fought for. "Jarek," she shouted, "we need to get to the ship now." But before Jarek could respond, a massive explosion sent a shockwave through the battlefield. Laura's vision blurred as the force of the blast knocked her off her feet. She hit the ground hard, her breath knocked out of her. For a moment, everything was silent. Her suit's systems struggled to bring her back online, and the world around her felt distant. She could hear Jarek's voice calling her name, but it sounded muffled. "Flame, get up!" Jarek screamed, pulling her to her feet. "We don't have much time!" Laura blinked, shaking off the disorientation. The ship was in sight, but the Pyrosians were closing in fast. She could feel the heat of their weapons on her back, and the adrenaline surged through her. "We're not done yet," she said through gritted teeth, shaking off the last vestiges of dizziness. "Let's finish this." With one final surge of energy, they sprinted toward the ship, dodging incoming fire and explosions. As they reached the vessel, Laura knew that this would be the final stand. They were out of time, and the fate of Pyros hung in the balance. Inside the ship, the atmosphere was tense. Laura, Jarek, and the remaining rebels climbed aboard as the ship's hatch closed behind them. Outside, the ground was erupting, the volcanoes spitting molten rock into the air. The Pyrosian forces had almost surrounded them, but they were not done yet. "Launch sequence initiated," Laura said, her fingers flying over the controls. "This is it. We need to break through or we'll be trapped here." As the ship powered up, the Pyrosian soldiers began their final charge, firing at the ship's hull. But Laura's training and her enhanced abilities gave her the edge she needed. With a calculated move, she sent the ship rocketing into the atmosphere, tearing through the volcanic chaos of Pyros' surface. The ship's engines screamed as they reached escape velocity, the pull of Pyros' gravity becoming less and less as they ascended. Below them, the capital city burned, the shock waves of the final battle still rattling the surface of the planet. They were safe, but the cost had been immense. The sky above Pyros was a distant memory now, the planet's fiery surface shrinking into the background as the ship surged toward the stars. Laura sat in the cockpit, her hands gripping the controls, with a steady resolve. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. Pyros may have been freed from the imminent threat of destruction, but the damage had been done, both to the planet and to the revolution itself. Beside her, Jarek watched the stars streak past, his face drawn with exhaustion. "We've done it, but at what cost?" Laura didn't answer immediately. She wasn't sure how to. The weight of the mission had sunk in. Many had fallen, and while they had stopped the weapon, the rebels' numbers had been decimated. They'd lost key leaders, and Pyros itself was now a land scarred by war. "The people will rise again," Laura finally said, her voice steady, "but they'll need time and guidance. We'll help them rebuild." Jarek nodded, his hand resting on the console as he stared at the fading planet. "What about you, Flame? What will you do now?" Laura's mind wandered to the Union, the organization that had sent her on this mission. Her connection to them had always been professional, but the Union wasn't her home. She didn't belong to any one place. She had always been a traveler, a soldier, a survivor. But there was something about Pyros, about the revolution, that had awakened something in her, something she hadn't expected. "I'm not sure," she admitted, "but I think I'll stay, for a while at least. There's a lot of work to do." The ship's systems beeped, drawing their attention to the large display screen. It was a message coming through from the Union's central command. "This is General Anders," the voice crackled over the intercom. "We've been monitoring your progress. The superweapon is down, but we need to know if the Pyrosians are still a threat. We're sending reinforcements to secure the system, but you're to report back immediately. We've got new orders." Laura exchanged a glance with Jarek, whose expression remained unreadable. "We'll be in contact," she said, cutting the transmission. The last thing they needed was to be pulled away from Pyros when the planet still needed help rebuilding. There's more to this than just the weapon, Jarek, Laura said softly, as if contemplating her next steps. The Pyrosian elite won't go down quietly. We've seen what they're capable of. Their influence might have been crushed on the surface, but there's more under the surface, politically, and with their secretive factions. This is only the beginning. Jarek looked at her, and for the first time since they had met, there was a faint trace of a smile on his lips. Then I guess we'll have to deal with that too. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, repairs, and rebuilding. Laura worked closely with Jarek and the surviving leaders of the revolution. Their joint efforts focused on restoring some semblance of order to the planet. The Pyrosian government was in ruins, its elite leaders either defeated or scattered. But the power vacuum left in their wake was just as dangerous as the oppressive rule they had overthrown. Laura stood on a platform overlooking the shattered capital, the smoldering remains of the Pyrosian infrastructure scattered across the horizon. The sky, once blackened by the volcanic eruption, was clearing, revealing the first signs of a new dawn. But the scars left on the land and on its people would take years, decades even, to heal. "We have a long way to go," Jarek said, walking up beside him. He looked at the vast landscape, his face heavy with the weight of responsibility. "But the people have hope now. They've seen what they can achieve. We'll rebuild, stronger than before." Laura nodded, her gaze scanning the horizon. She could feel the tension in the air, a mix of hope and uncertainty. It would take time for the people of Pyros to trust each other again, let alone rebuild their society. The deep divisions that had existed for centuries could not be erased in a single battle, but they had made a start. "We'll make sure they have the tools to do it," Laura said, determination in her voice. "The Union can help, but it has to be their decision. This is their home now." "Is it yours too?" Jarek asked, his voice softer. Laura turned to face him. She had been expecting this question, but she didn't have an easy answer. She had never truly had a home. She was a soldier, a traveler. But something about Pyros, about its people, had changed that. It wasn't just the mission. It wasn't just about stopping the weapon. It was about something deeper. "I think, for the first time, I feel like I'm part of something," she said, her voice quiet. "I think this might be my home too." Jarek smiled. "Then stay." Laura's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, the weight of everything they had been through seemed to lift. It was a small thing, but it was enough. They had fought together, survived together, and now they could rebuild together. "I will," she said, her voice steady. "I'm not going anywhere." In the months that followed, the people of Pyros began to rebuild their society. Laura and Jarek worked together to create a new government, a government by the people, for the people. The Pyrosian elite had fallen, but the damage done by centuries of oppression was not easily undone. However, the people were resilient, and with the help of Laura and the Union, they slowly began to turn their planet around. But there were still challenges ahead. The remnants of the Pyrosian elite had splintered into factions, each one seeking to reclaim power. The revolution was far from over, but now, with the support of the people, there was hope for a better future. Laura knew that her role here was far from finished. She had made a promise to herself and to the people of Pyros to stay until the job was done. Together with Jarek, they would fight not only to protect the revolution, but to ensure that it didn't end in bloodshed. As she stood with Jarek on the new balcony of the Capitol building, where the old regime had once stood tall, she watched as the sun rose over the planet. The flames of Pyros, once a symbol of destruction, now glowed with the promise of a new beginning. "We've come a long way," Laura said, her voice full of quiet pride. Jarek turned to her, his expression solemn yet hopeful. "This is just the beginning." Together they looked out over the city that was beginning to heal. The flames of Pyros had not destroyed them. Instead, they had forged a new future, one that would burn brighter than ever before. Epilogue. A legacy of hope. Years later, Laura stood once again on the balcony of the newly rebuilt Capitol, looking out at the vast horizon. Pyros had changed, but so had she. The people had risen from the ashes, their spirits stronger than ever. The Union had helped, but it was the Pyrosians who had truly rebuilt their planet. The bonds between the two species had grown stronger, and as the years passed, they began to work together. sharing knowledge, culture, and resources. But Laura knew that the future was never guaranteed. The factions that remained would always threaten peace. But now the people of Pyros were ready, and she would be there, standing beside them, ready to defend the future they had fought so hard to create. As the first rays of dawn broke through the thick clouds, she felt a sense of peace settle within her. She had found her place. Pyros was her home now, and with Jarek by her side, they would face whatever the future held together. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to support our channel, and stay tuned for more epic stories like this. Don't forget to leave a comment below with your thoughts on the story. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know where you're listening from too. We love hearing from fans all over the world.